like to call this meeting to order, and you're probably wondering why I'm standing here right now. And the reason is a sad but simple reason. Margie Paris is quite ill and is really unable to preside today and has asked me to do that as the president-elect in her place. So let's send good thoughts and wishes to Margie for a speedy recovery. Well, we have a very small agenda today. We'll probably be out in a half hour or so. As you can see, this is one of the largest agendas we've ever had in the Senate. And I think that's a tribute, actually, to where we are right now in the university. It's a very exciting time in which there are many changes and transformations. And the Senate is very much part of this process. And I thank everybody today for attending, our visitors as well as our senators. Because it's such a big agenda, I'd like everyone to please limit their comments when we get to the actual senatorial discussion part of this meeting. When we get to that part, if the senators could limit their comments to 2 minutes, otherwise we might be here till midnight. So not that you would go on and on, but there are just enough issues that the time would add up in that way. So please limit your comments to 2 minutes, and I will be calling time if things go on too long. Because we have so much to do, not only this year but next year, we are going to be adding 3 meetings next year, one in November, one in February, and one in April. And there are a number of reasons why. First, there will be fine-tuning for our reform of the university system of service. That's quite clear. That's just good precautionary measures to understand that things will come up that we will need to deal with. But even more than that, we will be in a process of realignment because there are many policies, university policies that refer to OUS and the Chancellor's office, which now, because we have a board of trustees, will have to be realigned. And the Senate is part of that process. We will probably have 50 to 80 policies going through the Senate next year. So we want to be ready for that. We're going to spend the summer making sure these are organized in slates of legislation and be ready to go from day one, as it were. And again, as a precautionary measure, we're putting in those 3 extra meetings just so we have the time and we've scheduled the rooms and everything is in order. Before I proceed, I would like to introduce some special guests today. We have members of our new Board of Trustees present, and I would like them to please stand and introduce themselves so we get to know them. Please. Thank you so much for attending today. Please introduce yourself to the...
I'm not going to bore you with any background information, but I'm here. Susan said the meeting was taking place, and I drove down just to see what this is all about.
Thank you so much. If you don't mind saying a word about yourself, where are you from, and just something.
I finished here in 1981, originally from Indiana. Came out here to run track and fell in love with Eugene, U of O. Went back to Indiana to get a law degree, and have been in business ever since. And wouldn't live anywhere else, and I absolutely love this university. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your service.
Kurt Wilcox. I work in a little part of the College of Ed called Into Careers down at the Baker Downtown Center. I'm the employee member on the Board of Trustees. I first moved down here in early 70s from New Jersey. Tried to get a history degree, didn't quite finish that, but ended up getting a master's in labor and industrial relations. Spent about 30 years as a union rep and organizer in Oregon, and retired and thought I would get a little part-time job to while away my retirement, and here I am.
Great, thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here today. Thank you for your service. Thank you so much. And as you'll remember, Susan was instrumental in the period of ratifying our Constitution. She was one of the 2 faculty members with John Bonine and Susan both on the stage presenting the Constitution to the Faculty Assembly for ratification. So thanks so much, Susan, for serving on the board. Next, we'll proceed to the approval of minutes. Do I hear any corrections or comments about the minutes?
I don't see the minutes posted.
I will look to the Senate Executive Coordinator. Okay. Thank you for your question. Any other questions or comments, corrections? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Abstain. And they are passed. Thank you. We now proceed to the university update, and first we will have remarks from President Michael Gottfredson.
Well, thank you very much, President-elect, and thank you very much for taking over today. Appreciate it very much and your time. So good afternoon. So I know we have a full agenda today, so I'm going to keep my remarks to 3 topics. The Board of Trustees' preparation to assume governance, funding for our clusters of excellence faculty hires, and the university's mission statement. So, as you all know, the Board of Trustees of the University of Oregon convened on our campus at the end of March for only their 2nd full gathering and had a very productive meeting. As we near the July 1st date, seems like it's coming ever faster upon us, for the board to assume governance of the university, the scope and significance of the changes that we have all made are becoming clearer. We have embarked on a major transition for our university, unlike that of any public university now in operation that I am aware of. July 1st, 2014 is truly a watershed moment for our university. It's one that's full of great opportunity, plenty of hard work ahead, and a path that will allow us to climb ever higher in prominence, even as we accommodate the persistent decline in state support that we've been witnessing over the last decade and a half. We have a board committed to our mission, knowledgeable of what we do, and keen to create resources to do it better. So with that deadline approaching, the trustees' discussions and actions are by necessity very substantive and very focused. The timeline for our board to establish policies and protocols that will enable us to function independent of the State Board of Higher Education is really very compressed, requiring efficiency as the trustees address a great volume of crucial work. So as I shared with the campus last week, I'm very, very pleased with the trustees' progress. It's great, and the thoroughness with which they're considering matters of great importance to our university. They've been putting in a lot of time, long hours, on this project. And at the last meeting, they passed tuition and fee recommendations by the deadline required by the state board. It was a tight deadline that unfortunately necessitated that they meet during spring break, a scheduling shortcoming that we will certainly work to avoid in the future. The board also received a series of reports, including our planned response to the new Higher Education Coordinating Committee, and we've talked about that previously. We will no doubt talk about it many times in the future as well. A report on new initiatives designed to improve recruitment, retention, and graduation rates, and an update on the short legislative session. Additionally, as you know, the board discussed the university's proposed policy on delegation of authority. This policy would allow the trustees to authorize others to act on their behalf, particularly the president and the faculty, a standard practice for public boards to foster operational efficiency. The policy is intended to maintain the principal delegation of practices of the State Board of Higher Education and apply them to the new board in the first instance. I regret that we were not able to get the material describing this policy out for comment and reflection in a more timely fashion. At the meeting, President Paris, Professor Bonine, and others raised very important concerns that the timing of the proposed policy language posting did not allow sufficient time for comment from the campus community, That's absolutely right. The trustees agreed that more time for input was needed and passed a temporary policy allowing the president to act in the interim and asked the University Senate to establish a process for collecting input on a permanent policy. The timeline, while predicated by their workload, was unfortunate, and we'll work to do better in the future. We look forward to receiving input from the campus. I do, the board does, and encourage you to participate in this process to share your insights. We have provided President Paris with a side-by-side comparison of the State Board of Higher Education policies. There are many of them, and the proposed Board of Trustees policy to aid in that discussion and understanding of these policies and comment, reflection. We'll have much more to do of this work, as President-elect Gear rightly pointed out. We have a lot of work to do together, as we will end up reviewing literally hundreds of policies the university has operated under during what is, after all, the previous 90 years of the governance by what has become the State Board of Higher Education. So while this process has presented challenges, it's also illuminated some of the great benefits for having a local board. So proposals like this one can be discussed and changed much more easily when you have a dedicated, local, interested in, focused on our institution, context of local group of trustees, a group of individuals focused on this institution, understanding this institution, our needs and our goals. The advantage is clearly beginning to resonate with our university peers, I have to say, in our state, as every public university in Oregon is now requesting a local governing board. Perhaps ironically, all of the universities that once opposed us in advocating for local governing boards are now asking for their own. And last week, after considerable debate and deliberation, the State Board of Higher Education granted 2 additional institutional boards and then 2 additional institutional boards with some conditions. We're all very proud to have led the way to this complete transformation of the state's governance of higher education, and we all look forward to supporting our colleagues however we can in their new endeavors. And we've made that offer to all of our colleagues, and we'll provide whatever support and help that we can in their own transitions. I remain strongly committed to the continuance and strengthening of shared governance, as does the new board. We welcome your input and look forward to working together in the next step toward our new exciting chapter for the University of Oregon's governance. I would also like to comment on the Provost's exciting Clusters of Excellence hiring initiative. I find that to be a truly exciting activity. As you've heard, this initiative will enable us to hire from 2 to 5 variable new faculty members in each of several key academic areas, raising already very prominent programs to the next level to be the very best in the country and the world. The provost has sought feedback on the process throughout the winter and is now accepting proposals. Monday, Provost Coltrane and I were able to announce $1.5 million in funding for the first phase of this important hiring initiative. And this recurring funding, pleased to say, comes from efficiencies gained through organizational changes that we first implemented last April. At the same time, the re-energizing, I would say, of our budget model under the leadership of Vice President for Finance and Administration Jamie Moffett and Vice Provost for Budget and Planning Brad Shelton is enabling better alignment between our operational budget for research and institutional priorities. And this will allow us to operate more strategically ever more as we go forward into the future. And I thank them very much for the effort. Supporting the University of Oregon's core academic mission is our top priority, and we'll seek additional funding for the Clusters of Excellence initiative, other academic initiatives, as well, of course, in our upcoming public campaign, and through deliberate discussions in future budgets. And then finally, this afternoon, I'd like to address the university mission statement, a critical issue on our plate also in the near term. So we will soon be reviewing our mission statement, a process that each of Oregon's public universities will undertake with their respective boards and campuses in concert with the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, or HEC. Tomorrow, I will address the HEC in advance of this process to review and revise the mission statement for presentation to that body by their September deadline. Now, as you know, the University of Oregon mission statement was crafted almost 20 years ago. It was written and approved by the campus and the State Board of Higher Education, I believe in 1995, reaffirmed again in 2008. I'm well advised. It's a very good statement, and at its core, our mission has remained unchanged, really, since the university's founding. We talk about that a lot. I do, as you know. But it's timely to take a fresh look at the language, especially in light of our new state context. To prepare for the Board of Trustees to provide a revised mission statement to the HEC, we intend to engage in a rigorous campus process, rigorous and rapid process under the guidance of our provost, gathering input from staff, students, faculty, administrators, and our Board of Trustees, everyone who would like to provide input. In my own view, our statement might more greatly emphasize our special role in the state, particularly by stressing the importance of research to the mission of the university and how that affects education of both our undergraduates and our graduate students, a special role that provides to us, a special role that it provides for us in the state, and our service to Oregonians. As a recent AAU statement has emphasized, research universities are defined by their serious and pervasive commitment to research. Research and discovery permeates everything that we do, from teaching and learning to engagement with business, government, and the broader community. And emphasizing that particular aspect of our mission and emphasizing it strongly is something I hope to do and to impress upon the HEC the important and unique role, then, that our university plays in the long-term generation and dissemination of knowledge and innovation through research. Also, it's our view that these priorities are not yet adequately reflected in the HEC's mission or the state's 40-40-20 graduation goals. We've pointed that out, and that's something that we'll continue to point out in our conversations with the HEC, and it seems to me it would be a good thing for us to re-emphasize as we talk about our own mission statement. As I mentioned, Provost Coltrane will lead the campus discussion of our mission statement and is going to share more about how to participate in that process, as well as other activities in a moment. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address you today, this morning. Look forward to our meeting.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, President Gottfredson. And next we will hear a report by our provost, Scott Coltrane, on the Ridge Review Report.
Thanks, Rob. I thought I would start by talking a little bit about the mission statement review. As the President's remarks indicate, the Higher Education Coordinating Commission's timeline for approving the mission statements of Oregon's public universities, and it's all of them, has made it so that we have to do this in a hurry. The HEC is planning to adopt revised mission statements at a September meeting. So when we found this out, and we shared it with our board when they met just over spring break, we decided we needed to do a very rapid, full consultation with faculty, staff, and students. So we'll begin a campus-wide discussion about our mission. The new board will begin reviewing our revised mission statement at its meeting in early June. So that gives us exactly 2 months. And we are going to propose revisions to our current mission statement, and we want this to be as wide-ranging as possible. So I will be setting up, through the Provost's office, a website to facilitate discussions. We'll post our mission statement, the mission statements of the other public universities in Oregon, and the mission statements of all the other AAU publics. We thought that would be a good place to start so you kind of see the form and content. Our first task, I think, is to decide on what form, length, and organization we would like. Our current mission statement is much longer than our sister institutions in the state of Oregon. They're like, a few lines, and ours is like a page and a half. Not necessarily a bad thing. So, but I want to engage the community in looking at how different universities talk about themselves. The first thing we'll need to do is consult with the HEC. Now, they're empowered, but they're not yet staffed up, and so it's kind of an iterative process. We'll be asking them what form they would like to see our mission statement in, and then negotiate with them, and our board will be involved in those discussions as well. So generally, mission statements typically provide a short purpose statement, that's usually called mission, usually a vision statement that's also pretty focused, and then a set of other value statements, and sometimes going into goals and other kinds of statements. I think what we'll require from the broader campus community is some endorsement of general ideas and concepts. What should be in there? And following the President's remarks, how do we differentiate ourselves, particularly differentiate ourselves from our other public state institutions, because the HEC will be, among other things, directing revenues to campuses based on fulfilling our mission statement. So for this process, we'll be asking various Senate committees to evaluate the mission statement options, including, I was thinking, the Academic Council, the Undergraduate Council, the Graduate Council, and the Faculty Advisory Committee. But any other faculty groups or Senate groups that you want me to include in the process, I'm happy to consult with them to ask for input. We'll also be asking from administrative advisory groups, including the executive leadership team, the academic leadership team, which is the deans and vice provosts, and the research advisory board. So the goal of the process is to update the mission statement and somehow capture what is our essence. It's kind of an 8,000-foot look at the university, but we want to do things like honoring our historical legacy, aligning us with the needs of state higher education and be coordinated with that, to differentiate our mission from those of other public universities in the state, and to prepare our campus to take advantage of new opportunities. I think what we'll do is offer up a few of the AAUs that look like they're very focused and very convincing, so you can kind of get a sense of whether you like one style over another. So rewriting the mission statement is a precursor, I think, to the larger goal, which is rewriting our academic plan, which is now 5 years old. So that we have in mind for doing all of next year. So look forward to next year and the extra meetings that Rob has put on the agenda for the Senate. I hope we'll be able to help you engage with the process of what it means to have a strategic plan that is a little bit more operational and priority setting than the current one. We have some great values in the current academic plan, but I think we need to refresh it and actually link it to some of the choices we have to make and help us plan for the next decade. As we launch a new comprehensive capital fundraising campaign, I think we need a vision for what we aspire to be and a concrete plan to achieve specific goals. I'm already in conversations with Chair Paris and incoming Chair Kier about how to ensure that the Senate is a central part of that process and how to help rewrite our academic plan next year. But fast forwarding or backward to the mission statement, I've been leading a series of academic planning exercises. I'll turn the next 3 to the ideas inherent in recrafting our mission statement. So look for notices on those. The next 3 will be held in the Knight Library browsing room. One is on April 23rd at noon to 1. One is on May 6th from 2 to 3. And the third is on May 20th from 10 to 11. These will happen then before our academics and student affairs group subcommittee of the board will be meeting, and that'll be in late May. So what the agenda calls for is for me to give you an update on the review report on our research office, and in response to a request from the Senate, I can give you a brief update. When the Riggy Review Report, this was commissioned about a year ago by the President and the Senate. I received the report in December, shared it with the Vice President Espy, Vice President for Research and Innovation, posted the report on the Provost website, so if you hadn't had a chance to look at it, go to the Provost website and it's there. I think it's also on the Senate website. I met last week with the Research Advisory Board, acronym RAB, and discussed with them plans to formalize their appointment structure and their nomination procedure. So this is a group that's only a year and a half old, and it was formulated through the Office of Research, and one of the things that the report said was this needs to be looked at as an overarching, gave several choices of how we might organize research oversight on campus. So I met with them, and we're developing a nomination process that's similar, that would take nominations from deans, from vice presidents, from the Senate, to fill various slots on this committee to really give advice to the provost and the rest of campus on how we conduct research. So I will be discussing with this Research Advisory Board their ideas for establishing and evaluating research centers. Turns out we don't have, like a lot of other things, we don't have very many policies about how and why and under what guise we do that kind of review. So we'll be developing some procedures and proposed policies about that. I'm also working with Vice President Espy and the Vice President for Finance and Administration, other offices on campus, to improve some of our research oversight and reporting procedures and some controls to avoid some of the problems that we encountered that we discovered through audits in an isolated number of research centers, but some things we were working to fix. So this work is ongoing. I'd be happy to come back to the Senate and talk more about it when we get to the report writing stage. We'll be reporting back. I think there are 7 items that the Riggy Review report suggested we address as a campus, and I'm happy to do that. We'll do a written report and post it on the Provost website by the end of this term.
Thank you very much, Scott. And could we all agree on a pronunciation for R-I-G-E? Let's have a vote. No, we won't do it that way. What is the true pronunciation according to the office? Riggy. Could everybody say with me now, once and forever, 1, 2, 3, Riggy. Thank you. That will help us. You can see I'm a conductor as well. So next we move to the new business. And I would like to ask the Senate to consider, through a vote, to moving the open discussion, which is now listed under point 5, to precede new business. The reason being that we would like to have information about the ad hoc committee on delegation of authority, which I will present briefly. We've already heard from President Gottfredson about the board meeting, but there's some other information about the meeting of the committee. And then a discussion, if anybody wants to make comments or have interaction about this important matter. We would do that preceding 4.1, which is legislation regarding Senate liaison to the UO Board of Trustees. And Senate Executive Committee and President Paris felt that this would be a better order so that we would be well informed when we voted on 4.1. Would anybody be willing to make a motion to a second? Discussion? So I'll call the question. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. And we move forward. Thank you very much. So first I would like to thank the President and the Board so much for their collaborative spirit and cooperation over the past several weeks. Those of you who were keeping, let's say, on top of the news during spring break have read different accounts. But for those of us who were at the meeting, we know that the board acted in absolute good faith. And I have to say, I've been to a lot of board meetings, and I have rarely seen a board that looked at an issue so clearly and was willing to discuss it very openly, and then come to a decision that was really truly inclusive, bringing our entire campus into what is now a substantive discussion about the committee policy, the ad hoc committee on delegation of authority, which would be ultimately considered by the board, and they would obviously draft their policy and discuss it and vote on it. So we thank the board today for including us in this and look forward to more such collaborative endeavors. And I think that that word, collaboration, for all of us at the University of Oregon, it's so important because we really look at this as our university. It belongs to all of us. And we just want to co-create it with our board in a way that really is truly representative of what we all aspire to. And this process we're going through now, looking at our mission statement and then the academic plan, is also part of that collaborative process. I see this as a time of great hope and optimism, and this board meeting really put that into a very very good place for all of us. So coming out of that vote by the board to ask the Senate to take a look at the policy and come back with comments by April 30th, we formed an ad hoc committee on delegation of authority. And at the first meeting, I was elected chair, and we've now had a second meeting. And the work is proceeding very well. We will ultimately have a red line copy of the policy to present to the board, as well as a brief report. And we will also be presenting all of the information that we're collecting from the campus community. That process is about to start. Within the next 2 days, we will be sending an email to the campus community asking for input. And you will be receiving that from Lisa McShimizu, our Senate Executive Coordinator. And I would encourage everyone to please participate and to really take this seriously. We've already sent the policy and some information to the Senate Executive Committee, and Committee on Committees. But now as this goes out to the members of your constituencies, please talk about this in your various units. It's really important to have the participation of senators in their various meetings, in their various units, talking about these matters that come up on the floor of the Senate and that influence all of us. So I would like to charge everybody today with that. Please bring this up at those meetings and encourage people to participate. This will make a huge difference as we go forward in this collaborative way that I've described. So I'd like to open the floor now for discussion. If anybody would like to make comments about their experiences over the last few weeks, or if anybody would have anything to add or would like to discuss a topic related to this. John Bonine. Here comes the microphone.
Thank you. I just wanted to add that the committee has already started meeting as of today, and basically what the process that we're doing is trying to make up a kind of markup with bracketed suggestions within our committee and bullet points to help stimulate you. And believe me, looking at this document and trying to read it, I really suggest a novel instead. This is, parts of it are turgid, confusing, and they also use some terminology that you really need to understand in context. So we decided that in addition to it being out, we really needed to provide you with some sort of suggestions. Your suggestions may be completely different. You may say exactly what I was thinking, whatever. So a few brackets, they're just suggestions to help get the discussion rolling. And there'll also be parts we didn't get to. We got part way through it today. And so there'll be other places where it just says some observations by the committee, and there'll be little bullet points, and you may say that's nonsense, or that makes sense, or you may say, you're really missing this key thing. Why don't you look at this paragraph? And so that's going to be put on the web by tomorrow or the next day, I think,
yes.
Lisa says. So you'll have another way of looking at it. I think Bill, who's also at the meeting and wants to.
Yeah, the material.
Oh, and I'm sorry, one more thing. So what we also decided, and we think it's very important, to model transparency and openness in our meetings, as we think should be a general rule in the university. So therefore, the dates and locations of the meetings are provided. We decided at our first meeting, this is the second one actually, that anybody who comes is welcome to make comments. The chair will be in control of, call on people or just allow you to jump in and say, well, while you're discussing that paragraph, could I suggest something? And so that'll all happen. What we're really trying to do is just prepare something that you can comment on better, and then we'll review what your comments come in. We do minutes, we do openness, you can come and participate, or you can send emails or whatever in any way.
Yeah, and the meeting schedule is posted on the Senate website for this ad hoc committee. And just to say that the function of the committee, of course, on the one hand, as John has said, it's to guide the campus in making comments and provide that guidance through substantive interaction with the document, but then collecting the information and going further and preparing that final report. It's a huge amount of work. And I particularly would like to thank my colleague John Bonine. He gave a presentation at the board meeting with very little time to do it, and has spent a lot of time looking at the document from a legal perspective. And thank you for all the time and effort that you've put into this. And then I want to thank every committee meeting, every committee member, Lisa Raleigh, Michael Dreiling, and others. Please, if you're here, raise your hand. John Allen. And we also have a student member who has not been able to attend yet. But thanks to all, because this is a huge effort. And we'll look forward to your participation. Other comments? I think Bill wanted to make some, and then Cassia.
Yeah, so I went to the committee meeting today, and I was really impressed by the thoroughness and the transparency with which the committee is tackling this. I don't want to discourage people from getting involved by convincing them that it's in good hands now, but I think it is in good hands. I'd also like to remind people of how we came to this point. This delegation of authority policy was not distributed to the faculty. I found it on the Board of Trustees website on Tuesday, 2 days before the meeting at which it was to be voted on, and distributed it to the Senate. And that's the process by which the faculty was able to get involved in drafting a good delegation of authority policy. If it hadn't been for the intervention there, I think the board might have gone forward with something that would have been contentious and not as good a policy as I think will come out of this open and transparent process. So I hope that I hope that in the future the faculty will get notified of these policies before the last minute, and I hope that we'll be able to get some input and make this work well. I was also very happy with how the board dealt with this surprise news that the faculty had not been consulted. They were extremely helpful and extremely encouraging in promoting a process where the Senate could get involved in fixing this.
And we really appreciate that collaboration. Just another point of information is some of the items that Bill just mentioned are dealt with through the legislation you'll be voting on, which is one reason we wanted to have the discussion first. But you'll see we have tried to address that through the legislation as well. Cassia.
I also was able to attend the meeting. I was only able to come on Friday. And I, too, am really inspired and impressed by the rapid, collaborative effort that all parties are taking on. And I think we're headed for a great new era in the Senate, absolutely. And so I'm really excited about that. Very supportive, and I hope everybody does get involved in this feedback, because it will really be a show of interest and participation in our own governance.
Thank you so much for your comment. I heartily agree. Any other comments? John Bonine?
Just two more things. If I can remember the second one. The first one I definitely remember. I was mentioned earlier there's a side-by-side document provided. It's incomprehensible. What was provided is not side-by-side at all. It's two columns, and there's a mixture in both columns of a little bit of legislation in one and the other. There may be a perfect explanation, but I can't find it. I don't know why some statutes are in one column and some in another, because the headings are Board of Trustees, which I presume was going to be just the draft policy paragraphs, and on the right side we were supposed to see where they correlate with existing authority policy in the previous Oregon State system of higher education, and why we're just sort of copying things over or inventing new things. But instead, it's true, the left column is the only place where you find the new language of the proposed policy, but the left column has some other stuff, and I don't know what it is. And on the right column, there's pieces of this and pieces of that. Some things are highlighted in yellow. Many things were not, in fact, taken from existing policy. The entire policy fails to cite the legislation, in fact, miscites or misstates the legislation by suggesting that all power comes from the Board of Trustees when there are specific words in Senate Bill 270 that provides that certain power is given by the legislature to the president and the faculty, and then there's supervision by the board. It's a different way of looking at things. And so those are some of the things you're going to see in some of the comments we've already made. And I really urge you to take a look at this. Now, I know it's boring, but so is preservation of democratic processes, so is academic freedom. And so my final point was just to say, to sit there and watch a really competent board start to talk about things. And I mean, not like some other previous boards may have been, but people who really love this university. And then to look at the chairs of the audience and see 25 empty chairs and about 6 or 7 chairs of almost nobody there. So I really urge you to do 2 things. Come to the next board meeting. Just make the time. Because, you know, we can catch things that happen at the last minute sometimes. They're doing it in spring break. But they decided they're going to do all new meetings when the university is in session, I mean, starting next year. It's a really important achievement. They really want to hear from people. So to show up at these meetings, and frankly, show up for the coffee. Now, you go around and talk to people, and what they're doing is seeing, this is not just some high school. They're the most incredible professors, students, faculty, classified staff, OAs, who care enough to come in, you know, have a donut with them, talk with them. Believe me, it makes a huge difference. This is politics, and we really need to do that if we want them both to respect us, to get our ideas, and then give us their ideas, because they've come from a lot of different business backgrounds and so forth that frankly sometimes are useful to us, but only if we're talking to them, not if we're fighting across some boundaries. So, thank you.
Yes, please come to the board meetings, and you will be really thrilled at what you hear and what you experience. It was very lively discussion, and you are an important part of these efforts. So any other comments, remarks? Yes, please. You could, yes, at this point, since there are no other members of the Senate who have
Thanks.
raised a hand.
My name is Natalie Brenner, and I am here for the GTFF. And I just wanted to sort of reiterate the GTFF's concern also regarding the topic of what your committee is discussing. So we just wondered, A, if you received the comment that we sent to you, the statement that we sent to you regarding the collective bargaining in particular.
I did not get it, but please
Okay.
come. Why don't you come and talk to me afterwards, and
Okay.
we'll make sure
Okay.
that I get it.
That sounds good. And then my
Yeah.
other comment was just, or it's rather a question, which is when you send the email soliciting input from the campus community, will that be only for faculty members, or will that be for graduate students as well?
Part of the answer is if we have the email lists, we can send them. We have some. To obtain email lists in the university, it may be necessary to go to the university administration and say, would you please send this? I don't know that process. I'm just a member of the committee.
Yeah, I'm
So
getting
you're
some
right.
information from our Senate Executive Coordinator who controls this aspect of it, and she has informed me, she controls the communication with the offices that control this aspect of it. And she has informed me that we can communicate with the students, right? Yeah, and with all of the 5 constituencies, we're able to do that. And that's been something that we've been working out. We have not always had that ability, but I think now we're moving into a new era when that's a really important part of this collaboration that we're all talking about today. I'm going, Kurt Wilcox, who's a Board of Trustees member, and then John Allen. Kurt.
Thank you, Rob. I can offer a partial answer to Natalie. Richard Wagner sent that statement to me last night. I then forwarded on to Margie, assuming she would be here. So it should be in Margie's possession.
Great.
But it would not hurt to forward it on directly.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. John Allen.
Thanks. I'm currently serving on that committee. I know that collective bargaining agreements have been a prominent part of the discussion thus far. I think that folks will see that when the next draft comes out. But also I just wanted to remind folks, we are soliciting feedback from everyone, all of our campus constituents. So I'm encouraging folks to come to our meetings. Please voice your concerns. We'll also have email on the website that folks can submit comments to for the public record. All of that will be looked at and reviewed by the committee. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments? Thank you, John. Last comment. Hearing none, we will move on to new business. 4.1. This is the motion, the Senate liaison to the UO Board of Trustees. This was a motion that I put forward some time ago, and we've had to move it I think this is the third time that it's been moved, and it's now found its home here today at a very opportune moment. So I am the maker of the motion, but I'm presiding today. To save time, because I made this when I was sitting among you as senator, if somebody wouldn't mind putting this forward kind of on my behalf since I'm presiding, I would appreciate it. Would someone be willing to put that forward?
I move the motion.
And do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you. And I will now read the motion, and then we will have discussion. Senate Liaison to the UO Board of Trustees. Section 1, 1.1. Whereas the Senate President has been invited to give a report at each meeting of the UO Board of Trustees, and 1.2. Whereas in order to create an ideal flow of information between the UO Board of Trustees and the University Senate, Section 2, 2.1, be it hereby moved that the Senate President or designee will attend each public meeting of the UO Board of Trustees, and 2.2, be it hereby moved that the Senate President or designee will consult with the Senate Executive Committee about the content of his or her reports prior to presenting them to the UO Board of Trustees, and 2.3, be it further moved that the Senate President or designee will present each report at the Senate meeting following its presentation to the UO Board of Trustees, and 2.4, be it further moved that each report of the Senate President to the UO Board of Trustees will be posted on the Senate website. Finally, 2.5, be it further moved that the Senate Executive Coordinator will remain in close contact with the Secretary of the Board of Trustees in order to be apprised of all upcoming board agenda items in a timely manner. Date of effectiveness immediately upon approval. Financial impact cost neutral. There's really no need for any background. We've already heard what we need in that regard. So any discussion? Seeing no hands, I will call the question. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay, and abstain. The motion is passed. Thank you so much. Now that was quick. Let's move on to 4.2, which is the clarification of Senate procedures for the election of President-elect. And we had a lively discussion at the last meeting about this. This motion is, in essence, really a transcript of that discussion with some legislative language that is needed. I am going to ask that we move that to the next meeting, to April 23rd, which, as you know, is a meeting created to look, before what I'm proposing, it was created to look exclusively at the work of the working groups that have been considering the reform of our system of university service. We'll have many committees coming before us on April 23rd. But I would like to add this item because we're about to go into the election period for the new vice president, who will be elected on May 28th. And I think we should move ahead in this agenda with so many items and leave this to April 23rd, which will be in just enough time to start the process of making announcements and informing everybody about that election. So I'm going to let go of that so that we can move forward to 4.3. This motion is United Academic Senate Liaison, and again, I was the maker of the motion, and would somebody be willing to put this forward in my behalf? So the motion is put forward. Do I hear a second? Second. Thank you. And now I will read the motion, and then we'll have discussion. United Academic Senate Liaison, Section 1. Whereas, in order to create an ideal flow of information between UA and the Senate, Section 2, 2.1, be it hereby moved that the President of UA shall appoint a member of his or her leadership team, hereafter UA Senate Liaison, to meet at least quarterly with the Senate Executive Committee to share common concerns and exchange information regarding academic issues and any other matters that are appropriate and pertinent to the work of the Senate. And 2.2, be it further moved that following the quarterly meeting described under 2.1 above, a report regarding the substantive issues discussed will be given by the UA Senate liaison at the next Senate meeting. And 2.3, be it further moved that the report specified under 2.2 above will be posted on the Senate website. Date of effectiveness, immediately upon approval. Financial impact, cost neutral. And I would like to just give one word of background, which is that this wording was formulated in collaboration with Deb Olson, who I believe, is Deb here today? There's Deb back there. I just wanted to thank her so much for her collegiality and collaboration. And now open the floor for discussion. Seeing no hands, I move the question, and all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Abstain. And so moved, and isn't this wonderful, moving right along to 4.4, faculty to be consulted on review and selection of the faculty athletics. So this motion is owned by William Harbaugh. Bill, do I hear a second? Thank you. And I will read the motion, and then we'll proceed to discussion, background, and then discussion. Faculty to be consulted on review and selection of the faculty athletics representative. Section 1, 1.1. Whereas the university is currently searching for a new faculty athletics representative, and President Gottfredson's website notes this position involves academic responsibilities of importance to the academic mission and reputation of the university, I quote, the FAR at the UO is responsible for ensuring the academic integrity of the intercollegiate athletic program, promoting the well-being of student athletes, and supporting institutional control of athletics through oversight of compliance and student eligibility. And 1.2, whereas UO's current FAR, or FAR, oh, it's been updated. That's quite all right. You are allowed to do that up until the time that it's actually put into the possession of the Senate. So 1.2, thank you so much. Let's. That's actually not by Robert's rules. We're supposed to read it. And 1.2, whereas the Senate voted in 2013 for legislation to develop UO policies that would ensure that the hiring and 360-degree review of executive administrators, explicitly including the FAR, be done as open searches, and that, among other procedures designed to include transparency and build trust in the current draft of that policy, I quote, UO statutory faculty as defined in the UO Constitution should comprise the majority of hiring committees, close quote, and the same for review committees, and, I quote, the hiring process should be as open as practicable, and whenever possible, finalists should make public presentations, close quote. And third, whenever possible, the hiring committee should solicit input on the candidates from appropriate constituencies, close quote. In parentheses, however, note that, unlike the legislation, the current draft policy is unclear as to whether it will cover FAR. And 1.3, whereas despite this legislation and draft policy, President Gottfredson has decided to hold a closed search for a new FAR with a hiring committee of 6 that includes only 3 faculty and only 2 before an intervention by the Senate President. And 1.4, whereas our current FAR has served for 25 years without review, despite the 2004 Athletics Task Force report calling for a review. And 1.6, whereas the new FAR position description states, I quote, the faculty athletics representative, FAR, reports to the president of the University of Oregon and serves at the will of the president, close quote, and does not include any assurances that the review committee will include a majority of faculty selected by the Senate or that the review will be a, quote, 360-degree review. Section 2, 2.1, be it hereby moved that the Senate requests that President Gottfredson consult with the Senate President and add another statutory faculty member to the hiring committee, and that he directs this committee to hold an open search for a new FAR, including public statements and an opportunity for questions and input from relevant constituencies. 2.2, be it furthermore moved that the Senate requests that President Gottfredson rewrite the FAR position statement to include 360-degree reviews with participation from the Senate Intercollegiate Athletics Committee, that would be the IAC, and Senate constituencies including faculty and student athletes at the end of year one and at least every 3 years thereafter. And 2.3, be it furthermore moved that the Senate requests that President Gottfredson not extend the term of the current FAR beyond 9/15/2014, that would be September 15th, 2014, without a 360-degree review, as in 2.2, and that would be 2.2 above. There are then links to various information sources, and then finally, financial impact is cost neutral. And is there any more information that you would like to give about this bill? Background. One of the reasons, by the way, that we read the motions is also for the people who are streaming, essentially, receiving us through web streaming. So,
yeah, I don't have anything further to add. I think the motion is pretty transparent, but if anybody has questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Great. Any questions or comments? Please.
I'm Mary Ann Hyatt. I'm just wondering, are there any positions on campus right now that require a 360-degree review after the first year? That seems pretty quick.
At the moment, the Senate President Margie Paris is drafting a policy in response to legislation that the Senate proposed that will at least recommend these quick 360-degree reviews. And the reason for that is to provide some quick feedback to people after they've been on the job for a little bit of time, in order to see if there are any immediate issues that they might want to address in order to improve their performance.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I call the question. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Abstain? The motion is so passed. Now we go to the next, which is 4.5, and that's amending bylaws regarding deadline for posting motion text. The owner of this motion is Lisa Raleigh, and please move the motion. And second. Thank you. And I will now read the motion. Amending bylaws regarding deadline for posting motion text. Section 1, 1.1. Whereas the University Senate considers important and often complicated motions at its meetings, and 1.2. Whereas UO senators and the university community require sufficient time in advance of Senate meetings to read and consider motion text. Section 2. 2.1, be it hereby moved that the Section 3.7.1 of the Senate bylaws be modified as follows. Additions in brackets and bolded. 3.7.1, introduction of motions. All members of the University Senate, members of the statutory faculty as defined in the University of Oregon Constitution, Section 2.2, and emeritized statutory faculty shall have the right to introduce motions. Motions shall be legislation, policy adoptions, or resolutions as defined in the University of Oregon Constitution, Section 7.2. Legislation shall be limited to issues that relate to the academic mission of the university or student conduct. Policy adoptions shall be restricted to new or revised university policies that are or will be posted on the University of Oregon Policy Library website. Resolutions shall be unrestricted in their scope, in brackets. Final motion text must be made public and available to the Senate at least 5 days prior to the Senate meeting, close brackets. 2.2, be it further moved that motions for which text is not received in this time frame will be postponed until a future Senate meeting. And 2.3, be it further moved that the maker of the motion may make minor typographical revisions or corrections to errors of fact until the point of the Senate meeting itself, by providing a redline version, and 2.4, be it further moved that any redline versions made prior to the Senate meeting will be posted to the Senate website by the Senate Executive Coordinator, who will provide immediate notice to senators of such revisions. 2.5, be it further moved that any changes made at the time the motion is introduced on the Senate floor shall be provided in an electronic redline version to the Senate Executive Coordinator so that this version may be displayed on the screen during the Senate meeting. Date of effectiveness, immediately upon approval. Financial impact, cost neutral. Lisa, would you like to give any background, please?
I'll just say this is brought forward on, I'm bringing this forward on behalf of the Senate Executive Committee. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, and as our President-elect pointed out with the previous motion, the sponsor of the motion can make changes up to the point of introducing a motion on the floor, but this will allow time, changes to be made visible in contrast to what has been provided previous to the Senate meeting.
Thank you, Lisa. Any questions or comments? Randy Sullivan.
I'm concerned. Oh, thank you. I'm concerned about some confusion on 2.5. Any changes made at the time of the motion, after it's been moved, any changes would consist of amendments.
Correct.
And, yeah. So what it sounds like these. What's intended here is changes made by the person proposing the motion right after it's introduced. And I would certainly recommend that, but it would be framed as an amendment because at that point it's no longer in the possession of the person who made the motion, but it's rather in the possession of the Senate once it's been moved. And the proposer, just like anybody else, will need to do so through an amendment.
Are you proposing to make an amendment?
I'm not quite sure. I'm just concerned. I'm at this point concerned about how to make it clear that basically what we want is if you're coming in and you've got some major amendments to make on your own motion, that you have them ready for us, ready for Lisa, and sort of submitted to Lisa. And I don't quite sure how to make that clear. It seems to be what we're trying to get at.
Yes.
Okay.
Lisa.
I believe the intent is so that when we first see it on the screen, that it's redlined, so that if someone walks into the room and is prepared to introduce introduce a motion that has been modified, that the first that we see it, it's redlined.
Oh, okay, yeah, I see.
And could the language be made better to reflect that?
Now that I see that, I see.
Well.
Okay.
Just a point of clarification would be this, in the brackets, final motion text must be made public and available to the Senate at least 5 days prior. So anything after that would need to be redlined. I think that's what we're talking about, correct? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this will just make it easier for the Senate to see what's been changed or added. Great. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I call the question. All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Abstain. The motion passes. Thank you so much. Now we're on to 4.7. 4.6, excuse me, the academic freedom policy. And this policy is an extensive one. As you well know, this policy has, let us say, been moving through various channels of the university and in the Senate for some time. And the history goes back to Richard LaRiviere. We were considering it during his administration, and at the time of the firing, we postponed it a bit, and for reasons that were really obvious when interim President Berdahl began. He said he didn't want to sign any new policies or any committee charges or anything of that sort. And so we waited until Mike Gottfredson began and have been working on the policy since. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a historical frame before I read it. Academic freedom policy. Oh, sorry, we need to move it first. Second, thank you. Section 1.1, whereas on November 13, 2013, the University Senate moved that, I quote, The Senate Academic Freedom Work Group will continue to work with the university president to draft a strong academic freedom policy. And 1.2, whereas the Senate Academic Freedom Work Group has worked with the university president and his staff, discussing important principles and presenting and discussing drafts in person and by email. And 1.3, whereas the most recent draft of the Senate Academic Freedom Work Group has been presented to the president on March 3rd, 2014, Section 2. 2.1, be it hereby moved that the University Senate approves the academic freedom policy proposal as stated below. And it's attached. So I will read it. Policy on Academic Freedom. The University of Oregon encourages and supports open, vigorous, and challenging debate across the full spectrum of human issues as they present themselves to the university community. The University of Oregon protects free speech through policy number 01.00.16. This policy on academic freedom builds on these existing commitments by recognizing the special contexts of scholarship, teaching, governance, and public service. Section 1A, Scholarship. The university's research mission requires that members of the UO community have autonomous freedom to conduct research and produce creative work and to publish and disseminate that work, limited only by the standards and methods of accountability established by their profession and their individual disciplines. B, teaching. The university's responsibility to help students to think critically and independently requires that members of the university community have the right to investigate and discuss matters, including those that are controversial, inside and outside of class, without fear of institutional restraint. Matters brought up in class should be related to the subject of courses or otherwise be educationally relevant, as determined primarily by the faculty member in charge of the class. C, policy and shared governance. Members of the university community have freedom to address, question, or criticize any matter of institutional policy or practice, whether acting as individuals or as members of an agency of institutional governance. The freedom of non-faculty employees to address matters under this paragraph may be limited with adequate notice by policies appropriately adopted by the university. D, public service. Public service requires that members of the university community have freedom to participate in public debate, both within and beyond their areas of expertise, and to address both the university community and the larger society with regard to any matter of social, political, economic, cultural, or other interest. In their exercise of this freedom, university community members have the right to identify their association or title, but should not claim to be acting or speaking on behalf of the university unless authorized to do so. Section 2. These freedoms derive immediately from the university's basic commitment to advancing knowledge and understanding. The academic freedoms enumerated in this policy shall be exercised without fear of institutional reprisal. Only serious violations of this policy, ones that rise to the level of professional misbehavior or professional incompetence, should lead to adverse consequences. Any such determination shall be made in accordance with established formal procedures involving judgment by relevant peers. Then we have some links of information sources. Financial impact is cost neutral. You'll see there are related documents that are attached and a legislative history, which I very briefly summarized. And now we will proceed to hearing more background, and I've been instructed that Michael Dreiling will introduce, John Boline will then explain, and then we will have further discussion.
I'll sit up here if that's all right and address forward.
Yes, that in this case, that's fine.
That's great. Thank you, everyone, and I want to speak to, I think, the overview that President Kier has outlined, or President-elect Kier has outlined with regard to this policy, that it has been a long stretch for a lot of people have been involved over many years, multiple presidents, multiple Senate groups, and this latest iteration, which I think has been strikingly successful in advancing what I think are some of the best practices for academic freedom found among AAU institutions across the country. It is a bold policy. It covers, in the ideal scenario, a broad range of all constituencies who are involved in shared governance, which really fits the special kind of university senate that we have here at the University of Oregon. And that is in large part what crafted a lot of the specific breakdowns, but it's also one of the areas or the sources of a kind of glitch that we have had to deal with over and over again. And it's that glitch that I want to speak to briefly. If you'll read on into section 1C, it is matters of academic freedom pertaining to matters around shared governance and policy, policy practice, policy generation, criticism of policy, and so forth, where the larger legal context has set some questions up that have come from the Office of the General Counsel, and we had been kind of running around this issue on this particular section C for quite some time. Yesterday, which unfortunately the motion's initial whereas did not state that we had a draft as of yesterday, and we had reached in a discussion, I think, a tentative agreement to limit that section C statement to members of the university faculty and students. But for reasons that were raised from General Counsel with regard to employees and specifically students, we were asked to remove students from that as well. So the members of the work group attempted, and this is why this version has changed on the website 2 times in the last 24 hours, is that the members of the work group decided that we wouldn't feel comfortable removing students as well as staff from those governance protections on academic speech, but we wanted to acknowledge the concerns about employee circumstances, which John Bonine's going to address here. Professor Bonine, of course, has been the kind of legal mind behind specifying and addressing and helping understand the concerns and clarifications coming from the administration as well as General Counsel. But I want to, before I pass the mic on to Professor Bonine, I want to just acknowledge that it has been some good hard work to get to a robust draft, I think, and now hopefully a product that the University of Oregon can be proud of. I think it's a strong policy. I commend the president for stepping up and working with us and having multiple conversations over many months to get us this far. So here's Professor Bonine to talk about the glitch with regard to a sentence we added with the hope to resolve what we thought was a remaining difference.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say that the process has been both exhausting and exhilarating. I think the members of the committee, and I think it's important that we recognize the members of the committee, John Davidson here, Deb Merskin, Bill Harbaugh, Michael Dreiling as chair, and Margie Paris ex officio. Members of the administration, the president, provost, vice provost, general counsel, a host of people have participated at various times, and I think we have a policy that is really terrific. It is really something that the University of Oregon can not only be proud of, but frankly should become a flagship for a lot of universities in this country in terms of reaffirming the values and the notion that academic freedom is not only teaching, and it's not only research, and it's not only public service, but it's also shared governance. And in a university which is not unique, but close to unique, in which we share governance with, in the Senate, with a number of different constituencies, we have to find ways to guarantee that they also, people all participate. This is kind of the Eugene way of doing things, and I think it's actually quite cool. But I have some comments, and I've written them down because otherwise I'm going to get something wrong. I'm going to read them. After several meetings and exchange of drafts focusing on Section 1C, as Michael Dreiling pointed out, we finally uncovered what appeared to lie at the root of the concern of some of our interlocutors. namely that allowing speech in the context of shared governance and criticism of university policies and practices by some employees could be problematical in some circumstances. This concern did not extend to speech on policies and practices by faculty or by students, except when the students were acting as employees. Basically, we're talking about the Garcetti problem, and I'll just mention that. Perhaps it'll come up in discussions, but this is the question of to what degree are public institutions to be treated in the same way as private corporations, where a private corporation can fire any employee for basically saying anything. And the U.S. Supreme Court rendered a decision that suggested that there are circumstances where public institutions, in that case they were talking about police officers, had to zip their lips. The court left open the question of whether this applied to universities, to faculties, and so forth. And so we've tried to figure out what does all that mean in this university. And we want to have a policy that is not sort of whatever the Constitution may provide, but what we as a university believe is important as an educational community. So as I said, the concern was that there might be instances in which employees, non-faculty, might have certain obligations, responsibilities, and so I drafted language, the last sentence, and if you could highlight it, I don't know if you can, Lisa, the freedom of non-faculty employees to address matters in this paragraph may be limited with adequate notice by policies appropriately adopted by the university. I drafted this language as recently as last night in order to try to focus the issue. The work group agreed to include this language at my request, even though it was not the preference of all the members of the work group. It is inevitable in a situation like this that we have some differences. This was my attempt to navigate this issue. The language that I created would indeed allow the administration to impose restrictions on some employees, those who are not faculty. But it would not allow this to be done on an ad hoc, case-by-case basis. That is, it would require that this would occur through formal policy adoption on whatever those limits might be. Why is this important and useful? Because good governance involves clear policies, not ad hoc decisions by individuals. And presumably, everyone, administration, faculty, other staff, students alike, GTFs, you name it, what we want is good governance, not arbitrary actions, including the administration, of course. Fortunately, the University of Oregon has good procedures adopted by the Senate and the President. All policies at this university are required to be in the policy library. Not all policies require Senate approval, however. There is a policy there called the Policy on Development and Management of Policy Statements, I just love it, which was approved by the University Senate and by the Senate President on December 15th, 2011. And it says this, and you're going to have to try to find it, maybe using search. If the Senate Executive Committee, there we are, determines that full Senate review is not necessary, the program manager and so forth will send the policy statement to the president of the university for approval. In other words, in our Constitution, we state that matters that involve, I don't have the exact language, but I'm sure it's such a tip of Frank Stahl's tongue, university academic matters is understood by higher education in America, that idea. Those things have to come to the Senate. But if we're talking about administering transportation in the university, a lot of other things, we don't vote on them, but the policy is sent to the Senate President, who looks at it, shows it to the Senate Exec, and makes sure there's nothing that's in our jurisdiction, sends it back, and then it gets adopted. But there's something more important. Despite the fact that not all policies go through the Senate, all policies, including those adopted by the administration without Senate participation, do normally involve opportunities for public comment. I want you to go to the flow chart, if you may. So at the bottom of page 1 and top of page 2 of a flow chart from the administration on how policy is developed, I want you to notice, where is it? I think you need to, yeah. I'm having a hard time even seeing it myself. Pointed out, public comment is here someplace. Up there. First of all, in the brown area, that's the top of page 2. Post-draft policy available for 30-day public review and comment and so forth. And now if you go up to the previous page, the bottom of the previous page, earlier during development, policy committee develops policy, public comments are collected and considered during development stage. I'm pointing all this out because what I want to say that I believe the language that I came up with does not throw anybody under the bus. I believe the language that I came up with recognizes that the administration may have a valid concern to provide some restrictions in certain contexts, but it should do so through policy, and that policy should be discussed publicly, give a chance for people to say, wait a minute, you could change it this way, or that's going too far, or we like that. In other words, not all governance or even public participation has to always occur through the Senate or through an election and so forth. Sometimes notice and comment and consideration is another way of promoting a democratic ideal. And I believe that that is here. However, if my suggested language is not acceptable, and it may not be acceptable to the president, and it may not be acceptable to OAs, to employed students, to classified staff, if it's not acceptable, then a motion to delete, if you go back to the sentence that I added, would be in order.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to add one additional thing. I wanted to be sure to clarify that this sentence, while the addition of this sentence implied this policy process that Professor Bonine just outlined, the absence of that sentence also means that the same policy process could occur. And furthermore, I want to suggest that the addition or inclusion of this sentence is what resulted in the shift of the work group's position to move from members of the university faculty and students to members of the university community. Again, the more inclusive terminology on that item 1C. And so that is the kind of internal tension and debate we've had within the Senate work group as we've kind of wrestled with the ideas and batted around ideas coming back from the president's office. But right now, this is the draft that is now up for the Senate to discuss, amend, move forward, and what have you. So I turn this now over to you.
And move forward we will. Who has another comment? Thank you very much to John Bonine and Michael Dreiling for their commentary. John Allen, and then Cassia Delabo.
Thanks. So the Garcetti decision seems to provide some context for what the bare minimum legal protections of academic freedom for employees like me are. But we're better than that, aren't we? I mean, I think as non-faculty employees, the Senate should look to us to be able to speak with the same level of academic freedom, either here in the Senate or to be able to speak to issues of policy or practice as anyone else in this room. I'd like to move to amend that we strike the last sentence of Section 1C.
So second, and open for discussion on the amendment. Discussion? Bill Harbaugh.
So my understanding of John Bonine's comments is that a sentence like that sentence or a sentence like that was included at on the insistence of the university administration. So I'm hoping that President Godfredson or someone on his staff will now speak to their reasons for wanting that sentence in the policy.
Any comments? President Godfredson.
I thought Professor Bonine summarized things marvelously well. Appreciate it very much, and the interaction that we had with Professor Dreiling. So this is, as Professor Bona indicated, this is a recent addition to what's been a very long and deliberative process. And so happy to take this under consideration and talk with the team about it. So appreciate it very much.
Comments? Let's see. Next, I saw Dreiling, Bonine, Harbaugh.
I think it's great we're even debating this. This is the perfect context to be considering and weighing this very item, this central issue around governance, shared governance, and policy making, and how it rests in the unique configuration of this university's Senate, which includes students, staff, OAs, and faculty, both tenure track and non-tenure track. It's a remarkable institution. It is something that is part of the Oregon Trust, part of the legacy that I think we will pass on through policy and through our actions. And who inherits what we pass on, of course, we'll get to work with it. What I want to talk about, refer to now in this context of this amendment is that the Oregon administrative rule that originally inspired our thinking to have a more inclusive position on this particular item, this more inclusive being inclusive of non-faculty employees in protected speech around governance, was the OAR, specifically, which is State Board of Higher Education's Oregon Administrative Rule 580-022-0005, and it's titled Academic Freedom. And so I'll quote from this just briefly, that it provides, quote, that the board, and this is the State Board of Higher Education, neither attempts to control, sway, nor limit the personal opinion or expression of that opinion of any person on the faculty or otherwise on the department's payroll, end quote. That provision in the OAR, in other words, meant that it was good enough for the State Board of Higher Education to have an inclusive policy providing speech protections on an extremely wide range based on that of speech coverage for non-faculty in various educational settings across the state of Oregon. And so I'm expressing my preference for the absence of that sentence, and I'm also acknowledging the difficulty we've had in negotiating to get to this point of coming to a solution, and I'm hoping that whatever we do as a Senate, we get to a solution and come out with a strong academic freedom policy. So I'll leave it there.
John Bonine.
So what I wanted to say is this. I'm really conflicted about this. I would love not to have this sentence in here, frankly. I would really love not to have this sentence in here. I didn't want it. I tried to craft a sentence that might reach out to the administration in a way that would give them just enough to satisfy whoever in the Johnson Hall was complaining about this, that they still have a chance to do something here to, there may be legitimate concerns. I tend to think they're not. I tend to agree with Michael, but they're nevertheless, give them something. In a way, if you eliminate this sentence, this may not be, this is a prediction, okay, so please don't quote me. You may be expressing a lack of trust in the administration. That you may be saying, we don't trust you to go through a policy process that will adequately protect us. If you include this sentence, you may be saying you're willing to try that process, but we don't know what's going to happen. If what happens with or without the sentence is that there's a veto by the president, or reconsideration, whatever the process, again, Frank Stahl knows it better than I, Susan Gary, that happens, and they come back and they say, well, we actually like what we asked you in the committee for a month ago. I'll tell you right now, I'm not going to bother participating. Bring it back to the Senate and we'll have another vote about it. I think I believe that this sentence bends over backwards. Now, that doesn't tell you whether to vote for it or not, but I think it bends over backwards, but it doesn't quite break. On the other hand, people may say, no, you're really throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and I understand the motivation for that motion. But I do want you to think about, and frankly, it is deeply frustrating to me not to have members of this administration come here and explain why they wanted language. Not to have the general counsel come here and say why he didn't want this and he wanted that and why he came up with this and that. Not to have other people in the high administration. We have the president today. But we don't have a lot of explanation.
Okay, thank you for
and
your
frankly,
comment.
I guess I want to say I'm insulted. I'm sorry.
Thank you for your comment. Davidson, and then Schlegel, Sullivan, and Raleigh. Davidson, please, and then Allen.
Yes, I'd like to speak in favor of the amendment. My concern with the last sentence of that paragraph, as it's drafted right now, is that, for one thing, it puts off policy making. We've been trying to make this policy for quite a while now, and making it appropriately with representation from the faculty in a committee that's trying to represent the Senate and the other constituencies, including the staff. And this bypasses that process and puts the policy making completely under the control of the administration, granted with some procedures allowing for public notice and for some input. But my sense is, I've been on this committee and I've been paying attention to the tenor of the discussion, and everybody has genuinely good intentions for the community, but my sense is that in particular the general counsel's preference in this area, especially as regards staff, is to have maximum power and discretion, maximum authority and discretion vested in the president. And a policy that would be drafted would likely reflect that. And just because that it's a policy and it's ad hoc would not necessarily make it a good policy. I could imagine a policy saying that all non-faculty staff shall comply with all supervisor directives regarding confidentiality and criticism of university policy or practices. That would be a policy. It would comply with this. It would be a bad policy. We thrive as a university, as a community, on having full information from everybody, including staff. And the way we're able to participate is because we have transparency, we have that information, and we're not going to have it if staff are scared that they can't speak their minds when they see things. And I also recognize that there are many gains in this policy, in terms especially of protection for faculty academic freedom. And we put those gains at risk that we've carefully negotiated with the administration if we pass a policy that the president, in all likelihood, won't consent to. And I think our staff constituency is important enough that it's worth us being willing to sacrifice that. Thank you.
Thank you. Helena Schlegel, please.
Yeah, I'd also like to speak in favor of the amendment. I'm more concerned on the student standpoint just because I think I'm the only student senator here today. Is there one more in the back? No? Oh, well, but you're not voting. Sorry. You can speak your mind too if you want. But I'm more concerned on the preface that I don't think a lot of the student government was aware. I know I was never informed about this last sentence being included. And in regards of student staff members being held to like different standards as like people who aren't employed through the university, I'm really concerned about like the discourse and the diverse like realm of opinions that we have on the student government. And so even perhaps going back to the committee and like talking more about these problems as a whole, but I'm very wary to vote in favor of, or vote against the amendment at this point.
Randy Sullivan.
Didn't the ASUO exec, aren't they university employees? Non-faculty university employees. So I'm hearing you say that they may not be able to speak freely in their action as, yeah. Yeah. It is unfortunate that we are not able to work out a compromise here on the floor because there is no one to work out a compromise with. I can assume, I would like to give the benefit of the doubt to the administration that there is a reasonable, there are reasonable cases that we may need to restrict some employees from exercising their First Amendment rights. But it's fairly hypothetical, and we can't, even with the willingness to compromise, we cannot design a compromise without that input. So, and I'm pretty good at compromises.
Lisa Raleigh? Oh, President Gottfredson would like to make a comment?
So could very well be. Again, as we pointed out, this is an initial reading of this language. So we'd like to take it under consideration and talk with the administrative team, and we'll be happy to do that. So, yeah, sure, of course, yeah.
May I just ask a procedural question, just so we is this the only, this is the last thing that kind of remains, this?
So I could speak to that. Maybe Professor Dryland would want to talk about that. There has been numerous discussions, a lot of movement. We're very encouraged. It's by and large an excellent policy, and so we made, and you might want to speak to that yourself, but quite a number of changes, and are very enthusiastic about, particularly about incorporating the Garcetti matter, and the committee, we've had full discussions about that.
So is my understanding that from the perspective, just so everybody is, we're on the same page, I think I've heard the president say that this is really the only, let's call it bone of contention that remains, and to be considered, bone of contention to be considered. And then for the committee, is that the same? Is that what I'm hearing as well, just so everybody is on the same page? So the options that there are options that we have in a situation like this. It can be put off to the next meeting. It can be done this time. It can be not now. We have to vote on the amendment, but just so everybody knows that there are options. We moved it. We moved it. We moved it, and we're going to vote on it. But just I'm addressing the comment of under consideration, to put something under consideration. That's all. I need to go in order. Next, Lisa Raleigh, then John Allen, then Kasia Delabau, then John Bonine, then Michael Dreiling.
So as a non-faculty employee who's participating in shared governance at this very moment, I want to appreciate all the hard work and negotiation that's gone into this. And I really appreciate the fact that people in my category of employment, Officer of Administration, are part of this body. And I feel that we should be able to participate fully. I realize that this qualifier doesn't necessarily prevent me from speaking out as a senator or in my particular position, but I do feel this qualifier is written in such a way to anticipate the possibility of a policy existing, and Senator Dreiling has pointed out that that policy might exist regardless of whether this sentence is included or not, and I therefore support the striking of this sentence.
Thank you. John Allen.
Thanks. I don't think that non-faculty employees are asking for anything special or above and beyond what protections anyone else in this room enjoys. And there's nothing in Garcetti that precludes us from striking this sentence. I think a no vote on the amendment would send a really chilling effect to the ability to speak to non-faculty employees like me, both here in the Senate and outside throughout the university. Thanks.
Cassia Delabau.
I just wanted to make the comment that I am impressed with the progress of the dialogue that's been happening, and I have. It's interesting that we're trying to make a statement with our vote where we want to go with this, and I believe that we will continue refining this policy as we do move forward. And so I would support the idea of the continued dialogue with the groups. Because this issue will retain or sustain, and I have the faith that that dialogue will make progress on it.
No, next would be Bonine, Dreiling, and then Harbaugh.
I just want to say, let's get this done. The only time when we've been able to get down to the nitty-gritty is under the press of time. It's been hard to have meetings. It's been hard to have people have their schedules coincide. And finally, we have a negotiation the day before the Senate meeting. If we don't vote something, one way or the other, we'll be talking about this next fall. So I just, in response to what Rob said earlier, I hope that you do not put this off. Policies can be modified. There's a whole process in the Constitution. But I think we need to say, we're done at this stage. Whatever is the next stage, we're ready for it.
And just to clarify, I was not supporting that. I was making a procedural comment. I just want to make that very clear. Dreiling.
Yes, I wanted to speak to a number of issues, and I'll do it briefly with respect for the time. And one was the comment by President Godfredson that a great deal has moved forward, and he is absolutely correct in that. And I commend him and members of his administration for moving forward on a number of critical issues. I think, apart from this particular sentence, this is a fantastic policy, and I'm ready to vote on getting rid of that, and then moving forward with any procedural discussions that would come out of this vote that the Senate makes on this motion, to hear the remaining concerns and see what needs to come next out of that, as Professor Bonine has mentioned. So I'll leave it there.
Bill Harbaugh.
So for me, the most substantive issue here is the question of shared governance. In the Senate, we rely a lot on the input of staff and OAs. I think it makes us give better advice and helps us do a better job running the university. And my concern with that sentence is that I don't see how a staff member can honestly participate as a member of the Senate with that sort of chilling possibility there in red. So I fully support striking that sentence, and then I think we should do that quickly and adopt this motion. It's a great motion. I think the board should be happy that we've done this so thoroughly and in a way that's consistent with how most other universities do these sorts of procedures.
I'm going to call the vote on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
I don't understand. I don't know what I'm voting on.
Well, it's whether the amendment is to strike the statement in red, as put on the screen. I'll do it again. Okay. All in favor of striking the statement? And all opposed? Nay. And abstain. Okay. So the statement is stricken, and now we return to discussion about the motion. Please, Senator Vaintrub.
I have a question about third sentence in section 2. So could you pull down a little bit? Yeah. So it's about the only serious violation of this policy. So it doesn't make sense because we're talking about violation of our policy or are we talking about abuse of this policy? Can I ask for clarification?
Could you put it there? Oh, you'll have to put the microphone closer.
Okay.
We could barely hear. Could you say that again?
Okay, I'm asking for clarification on this sentence underlined. So what policy does it refer to? Right. So if it means abuse, I suggest amending this, because only administration can violate this policy, the faculty member.
I'm going to ask the maker of the policy to comment.
That is that abuse would perhaps be clearer. I don't know how you feel about it.
Violation. Yes.
So it would have to be an amendment, of course.
So do I hear an amendment?
Would you like to make that amendment?
Make an amendment of the wording, replacing violation by abuse. Abuses, okay.
So replace the word violations with the word abuses.
Correct.
Second, discussion on the motion, on the amendment, sorry. Please? Yes.
Then my question is, who defines that?
Could you
Who
put it,
defines
thank you.
serious?
Deb Merskin.
Who decides and who defines what a serious abuse is? Okay. Relevant peers. Okay. Emphasizing that.
Oh.
Good. Thank
Did
you.
everybody hear that? It's the last sentence that determines abuses. Other comments, questions? Seeing none, I call for a vote on the amendment. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Abstain. So this amendment passes. Abuses will now remain. And we return to discussion about the motion. Further discussion? Do I see any cards? Senators, raise your cards when you... No? Then I call the question. All in favor of the entire motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Abstain. The motion passes unanimously. And now we proceed, as if we haven't already done enough today, but we proceed to 4.7, the legal services policy, also a foundational policy of the university. It's a very important meeting today. The owner of the policy is Gordon Sayre. Would you please place the motion?
Yes, thank you, President Keir. I served on an ad hoc committee along with Margie Paris and Tom Leininger, both from the law school. We were delayed a couple times. Finally, we were able to meet with General Counsel Randy Geller, and we worked over 4 or 5 issues which were still outstanding and needed to be, we needed to reach a compromise. We were able to do so. As many of you know, this policy has been through many different versions, amendments, red lines, whatever you want to call them. And so I hope that you all have had a chance to read the latest version that is up for adoption for consideration here today. I, of course, not a lawyer, not as experienced as my 2 colleagues on that committee are, but I can attempt to answer the questions you might have today. I did not expect that Margie would be absent here.
So I have to say, my eyes did not see that clock accurately, and it is indeed 5 minutes to 5. So we should probably skip to the final section of the agenda, and at the next Senate meeting, it wouldn't be April 23rd, although that's up to Margie as Senate President, and she would confer with Senate Executive Committee, but most likely that would mean that 4.7, 4.8, and 4.9 would go on the May 14th meeting, because the April 23rd meeting has been reserved for the working groups. We have to pass a certain slate of legislation related to the committees, which is related to our outreach to the committees for service. That has to go through, so people will have charges. I will recognize Bill.
I would like to move that we extend the meeting in order to deal with this legislation.
Thank you. Do I hear a second? Thank you. All in favor of extending the meeting, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay? Abstain? I would just like to see the number of nay hands just so we can record it officially. I want to make sure that we're being correct here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 nay, please. And so we will extend the meeting. You didn't say how long, so I would ask for a motion that would be more specific. We voted to extend, but now we need to decide.
No, the motion passed, and it's up to you to decide how long. Sorry.
Thank you very much for clarifying. I agree. We will do this policy, and then we will have not more than 2 minutes of comments related to the report section and then adjourn. So, well, yours is a notice. Yeah. It's already noticed officially. We'll just mention that you've noticed it. Don't worry. It will happen. Don't worry. And because there's a time limit on Randy's and also on the Senate election, those will be April 23rd at the very beginning. Those have a very specific time limit on them. So legal services policy, do you give this motion to the Senate?
Yes, I'd like to put forth this motion.
A second, thank you. And now I will quickly, very quickly, read the motion. Section 1, whereas the Senate created a drafting committee to create a proposed legal services policy, and 1.2, whereas on May 8th, 2013, the drafting committee submitted a proposed legal services policy to the Senate, and a senator moved its approval, and 1.3, whereas on May 8th, 2013, the Senate tabled the motion in order to permit research on a question having to do with access by university employees to the Oregon Attorney General for legal advice, and 1.4, whereas on May 22nd, 2013, Senate Vice President Margie Parris informed the Senate that employees no longer had access to legal advice from the Oregon Attorney General, and that she would like to confer with the Office of the General Counsel before completing work on the policy proposal, and 1.5, whereas on May 22nd, 2013, the Senate tabled the policy until the fall 2013 term, and 1.6, whereas the proposed legal services policy has been revised to remove language referring to employees' access to legal advice from the Oregon Attorney General, Section 2, 2.1, be it hereby moved that the University Senate approve the legal services policy proposed as stated below and here attached. Legal Services Policy Preamble. The Office of the General Counsel is responsible for representing and advising the University of Oregon in all legal matters related to university operations. Every employee and student of the university shall have the right to obtain legal advice or representation from someone other than the General Counsel at the employee's or student's own expense or on a pro bono basis in connection with personal legal matters, matters arising within the scope of employment, and matters that may affect the university. Definitions. I think we could skip that section if you would like to read that on your own and proceed to policy statement. Authority of the General Counsel. The General Counsel has the exclusive authority to, I am going to put numbers here just for ease. 1, issue legal opinions with respect to matters related to the university. 2, retain outside counsel to represent the university and authorize others to retain outside counsel to represent the university. 3, accept service of process, including subpoenas, on behalf of the university and designate others to accept service of process, including subpoenas on behalf of the university. And finally, 4, receive tort claim notices on behalf of the university and designate others to receive tort claim notices on behalf of the university. Payments from the university for legal services rendered on behalf of the university shall not be made without the authorization of the president of the university or the General Counsel, whether payment is made directly by the University of Oregon Foundation, or by use of University of Oregon Foundation funds. Claims against the university shall not be settled without the authorization of the president of the university or the general counsel. The general counsel shall not provide legal advice to an employee except in matters occurring within the employee's scope of employment. The general counsel shall not provide legal advice to a student unless that student is acting in his or her capacity as an employee or authorized volunteer. Prior to any decision to participate in litigation not directly involving the university as a party, by filing an amicus curiae brief, the general counsel shall notify the president of the Senate of the intention to do so. Right to legal advice or representation. Every employee and student of the university shall have the right to obtain legal advice or representation from someone other than the general counsel at the employee's or student's own expense or on a pro bono basis in connection with personal legal matters, matters arising with the scope of employment, and matters that may affect the university. This right to counsel shall not be compromised by any university policy or by the general counsel. Government investigations. If an investigator from a government agency requests to interview a university employee or seeks data, documents, or access to files, the employee should tell the investigator that the university will generally cooperate, but only after consultation with its lawyers. The employee should telephone the general counsel to provide notice of the contact. Defense and indemnification of employees and authorized volunteers. The university shall defend and indemnify any employee of the university against any claim or demand, whether groundless or otherwise, arising out of an alleged act or omission occurring within the scope of the employee's employment. The scope of employment of a tenure-track faculty member includes teaching, scholarship, and service that are performed as part of the faculty member's job responsibilities. Consistent with the terms of any applicable liability insurance, the university shall consult with the employee regarding any term of a settlement agreement that affects the legal or academic rights of the employee. The university shall not provide a defense and indemnification in case of malfeasance in office or willful or wanton neglect of duty. The university may choose to defend an employee under a reservation of rights. Any employee of the university to whom the university is providing a defense shall cooperate fully with the university in the defense of such claim. If the university determines that such employee has not so cooperated or has otherwise acted to prejudice the defense of the claim, the university may at any time terminate its defense and indemnify or proceed under a reservation of rights. It's used in this section, employee indicates an authorized volunteer and a former employee or authorized volunteer. Reimbursement of legal expenses. An employee may be fully or partially reimbursed for legal and other expenses incurred in the defense of a claim or complaint made to a government agency or a professional licensing authority if the university determines that the claim or complaint arose out of the employee's performance of university duties. Such reimbursement is subject to the approval of the president or designee or the general counsel. The university may decline to reimburse an employee for any expenses incurred prior to the university's written commitment to provide reimbursement. An employee shall be fully reimbursed for legal expenses incurred in a matter in which the general counsel would have provided legal representation to the employee, but for a conflict of interest. An employee may not be reimbursed for the payment of a fine. Financial impact, cost neutral. And now I turn to Gordon Sayre for any further background before we have a debate or discussion.
Yeah, the latest draft that you just read reflects the meeting that the three of us had with General Counsel Geller on February 28th.
Great. Comments? Bill Harbaugh, and then John Bonine.
So, Gordon, has this been vetted by the general counsel? If we pass this, will President Godfredson sign it? Is that the...
Yes, certainly that is our assumption. The meeting was very amicable. The general counsel indicated that he was willing to abide by this policy.
John Davidson? And Bonine, I'm sorry, and then Davidson. And then Sullivan.
Could you scroll back to the beginning of the policy, Lisa? Sometimes I write legal memoranda about what's going on in the university, and I send them around, and it stops what's going around, such as the proposal to have a freedom of speech area confined to a small area around the EMU. And I wrote a long memorandum about this. Somebody could claim that I was issuing a legal opinion. So I would like to ask if a senator would be willing to propose an amendment to insert before the phrase legal opinion to issue official university legal opinions. Because I certainly want to keep issuing things, and I don't want somebody saying, well, you can give advice, but we think what you did was issue a legal opinion and people are going to believe you, and that's up to whether people believe me or not. But I think what the university can only do is to say what are official university opinions. They cannot tell faculty that you can't issue something, and you can't even call it a legal opinion on your own if you want to. I want to be able to do that.
Yes, I'd like to take up the...
we have to go in act. I see.
Yes, so I wish to make the motion to amend the language in this text to read under the first bullet item, under the heading authority of the General Counsel. I'd like that to insert into that first bullet item between issue and legal the two words official university, so that it will issue official university legal opinions. That's how it should read.
Second? Did I hear a second? Yes, thank you. And now discussion on the amendment. Do I see any hands? Discussion? Okay, seeing no hands, call for a vote on the amendment. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Abstain. So it passes, and official university is inserted. We return to discussion on the motion. Now we have Davidson and then Sullivan, and anybody after that, and then Pedro Garcia-Caro.
Gordon, I was, years ago I used to work as a staff attorney for ASUO Legal Services, and we used to give advice to the ASUO on lots of matters, including various legal matters. And then for a while we were told we couldn't do that, that they had to get their legal advice from General Counsel. The language here in the section on the right to legal advice or representation says that students and employees have the right to go ahead and pay someone like, legal services staff presumably, to get that kind of advice. Is ASUO as a body, are they part of the university that would have to get permission from the president or the general counsel, or are they employees and students who would have that? Did y'all talk about that or have an idea of were you thinking about the ASUO Legal Services Office when you drafted this?
Know that the independence of the ASUO from the university and its financial independence, as you allude to there, did not come up in our discussions. Rather, what did come up is the fact that everyone always has the right to seek legal advice on any such matter. And the redundancy or superfluity of this clause was entertained, but we believe that it was very important to include it, and thus it is actually included twice in the preamble and again in the right to representation section. We discussed moving it from one spot to the other, and I think it ended up being in both places. But the principle is important enough to repeat.
Could I follow that up? Would it be possible for me to make a motion to have that section on right to legal advice or representation to be amended? Can you bring that up so that I can see it? So that it would read every employee and student of the university and the associated students of the university shall have the right. So it would just insert the words after university and the associated students of the University of Oregon.
Second, discussion on the motion. The amendment, sorry. I meant amendment. Discussion. John Bonine.
I just wondered, John, whether you want to go a little further down in that sentence and say, at the employees, comma, students, comma, or organization's own expense, because that would allow ASUO funds to be used. So you might want to move that also, or clarify, or add that as another. I'm not sure what the right procedure would be. Okay, so you actually meant what I just said. Just checking, just checking.
Okay, any other discussion on the amendment? Discussion? Hearing none, I call the vote. All in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Abstained. So moved, and we return to the discussion on the motion. Sullivan is next. He passes, and Pedro Garcia Caro.
Yes, I had a question about the figure that we're instituting within this motion, which is the General Counsel, who we are defining here, I think, for the first time in university's legislation, as far as I can tell. So it's more than a comment, it's really a question about this figure, where it's nowhere to be found in our Constitution. I can only find it on the webpage as an appointee to the president, but I wonder whether this might be a place to set in motion a procedure to review those appointments, to have a way of participating in the authority that we're creating.
Mm-hmm. And where were you, what were you pointing to in particular? Just want to make sure everybody sees that.
In the policy statement we have, this is a moment when we are creating this authority, basically. We are defining it for the first time, I think, in the history of the institution.
Right. So it's right here, this particular
right.
set of, and there's bullet point down further too. I just want everyone to make sure that you know what is involved. Is that, and then Bill Harbaugh?
So Pedro, we have a legislation to develop a policy that will require that, that any new general counsel be hired with a committee, an open search process, and a committee that includes, I think, a majority of faculty representation. So I think that is already moving forward slowly, and I don't think we need to amend this to include that. But then there was also a question about whether the legislation or the wording we just changed also needed to be changed in the preface, in the preamble, sorry. So
could we scroll down to the preamble, please? I would like to share a concern with the body, is that we did a quorum count and we're not sure that we have a quorum remaining. So we would be glad to do an official quorum count. We just can't see all of the... Okay, then we'll proceed unless someone calls for it. Our parliamentarian, what do you say?
Hear what?
He says that we don't have to have it unless someone calls for it, we can vote on this. I stated it very carefully. I said I had a concern. Okay? You've noted my concern. So unless someone calls for it. So we return to the Gordon had a statement to make. Are you making an amendment?
I propose to amend the language by striking that selected passage from the preamble so that the part in the reservation of the right to seek representation would remain and be definitive.
Second, discussion about this amendment. Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Abstain. Okay. So the amendment passes, and we return to discussion about the motion itself. Any other comments, questions, discussion? Randy Sullivan.
Separately, I think, and Bill
Yeah.
sounds like he's got some things going there.
Please use the microphone, so we want to make sure it gets into the
Thank
minutes.
You.
Thank you.
I forgot what I said.
Go ahead.
I just want to, keep the scope of this within the intention of that it's dealing with the legal services policy and not with personnel matters dealing with general counsel, which I think is an appropriate area of concern that should be addressed separately and carefully, because it's really important that general counsel is very accountable to the president.
Yes. You're not proposing an amendment, just making a comment, a friendly comment. Yes. Any other comments, questions, discussion? Hearing none, I call the vote. All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Abstain. And the motion so passes. Now we quickly, I hear some applause. We go on to the next section very quickly, reports. It will be less than 2 minutes. 6.1, I'm simply reminding everybody that April 23rd is a Senate meeting and a very important one. We have to pass a very large slate of work that has been done by the working groups on committees, so the charges and responsibilities can become part of our Senate outreach effort for people to serve on these very committees. We need to have those charges and responsibilities dealt with on April 23rd. So please, we would like full attendance at that meeting. And then 6.2, I'll ask Lisa to comment about the outreach, which is related to outreach for community service on elected and appointed committees and Senate elections.
So I'll be very brief. Either later this week or early next week, we're going to be sending out our committee services preference survey, asking folks to sign up for appointed committees and also to run for election for elected committees and the University Senate. We'll be completing that process within about a month of sending that out, including having a 2-week period for elections later on. But what I really wanted to let you know is that we're doing what we're calling a service interest open house this year. For anybody who is interested in university service but wants to ask questions and get more information, and that's going to be coming up on Friday the 18th from 2 to 4, and that email will be coming out to you all soon, so please look for that. April, yes, sorry, what did I say? That's a Friday.
April 18th, Friday. And I'd just like to acknowledge Lisa, as she is a superb Senate Executive Coordinator. She has been doing so much great work for us. And then quickly to say that Randy has made a notice of a motion, 7.1, final examination schedule revision, which we will consider on April 23rd. And with no... Pardon? Yeah. Randy asked, please contact him if you have any comments, issues with that policy. And Bill Harbaugh, this is under other business, unless you're placing a motion.
Notice of motion for a UO Senate award to be given to a senior administrator who exemplifies the principles of shared governance, transparency, and trust.
Wonderful. Great. So that goes on notice of motion under 7. 8, any other business? Seeing none, we now